Jake Morrison never thought playing cards would get him into this much trouble. As the only human aboard the interstellar trading station Nexus Prime, he had gotten used to being the odd one out. Most aliens treated him like a curiosity at best, a primitive savage at worst. The cat-like Felixians were particularly dismissive of his species. That's why when Princess Zarathul of the Felixian royal house challenged him to a game of Quantum Hold'em, Jake couldn't resist. The sleek, silver-furred alien sat across from him in the station's high-stakes gaming lounge, her emerald eyes gleaming with predatory confidence. Her retractable claws tapped rhythmically against the holographic table as other patrons gathered to watch. "Are you certain you wish to embarrass yourself publicly, human?" Zarathul purred, her translator rendering her words in perfect English. "Your kind is known for many things, but strategic thinking is not among them." Jake shuffled his physical cards, an ancient Earth custom that always confused aliens who relied on holographic interfaces. "Well, Your Highness, I guess we'll find out. What are the stakes?" The princess's whiskers twitched with amusement. "If I win, you will publicly acknowledge the superiority of Felixian intellect and serve as my personal servant for one solar cycle." The crowd of aliens murmured excitedly. A few crystalline traders clinked their mineral bodies together in what passed for laughter among their species. The hulking Vorthan warriors growled approvingly. "And if I win?" Jake asked, keeping his expression neutral despite the ridiculous odds everyone was giving him. Zarathul's tail swished confidently. "That will not happen. But if by some impossible chance you succeed, I will grant you any reasonable request within my power to fulfill." Jake nodded and began dealing the cards. What the princess didn't know was that humans had been perfecting the art of poker for centuries. While other species had developed quantum computing and faster-than-light travel, humans had mastered the subtle art of reading micro-expressions, calculating odds, and most importantly, bluffing. The first few hands went as expected. Zarathul won with mechanical precision, her enhanced Felixian reflexes allowing her to process probability matrices faster than any unaugmented biological brain should be able to. Her supporters cheered with various alien sounds of approval. "Perhaps we should end this charade," she suggested after winning the fourth consecutive hand. "I am beginning to feel sorry for you." "Actually, I'm just getting warmed up," Jake replied, adjusting his worn baseball cap. It was another human quirk that confused aliens wearing decorative items that served no functional purpose. What Zarathul didn't realize was that Jake had been using those first hands to study her tells. Despite her superior intellect and enhanced biology, she was still a biological creature with unconscious habits. When she had a strong hand, her left ear twitched almost imperceptibly. When she was bluffing, her pupils dilated slightly. Her tail movements indicated her confidence level. Humans might not have quantum brains or enhanced reflexes, but they had something else, the ability to read emotion and intent in ways that even the most advanced alien psychology couldn't fully understand. The fifth hand changed everything. Jake was dealt a pair of sevens, not a strong hand, but not terrible either. Zarathul received her cards with her usual composed demeanor, but Jake caught the slight ear twitch and the subtle straightening of her posture. She had something good, but Jake had learned something else about Felixian psychology during his time on the station. They were naturally aggressive hunters, which made them prone to overconfidence when they sensed weakness. He let his shoulders slump slightly and sighed. "I suppose I should fold," he muttered. Just loud enough for her sensitive ears to pick up. Zarathul's pupils dilated with predatory excitement. "Wise choice, human. Though it would be more amusing if you stayed in." Jake pretended to consider this, then pushed chips into the center of the table. "You know what? I've already lost this much. Might as well go down swinging." The princess's confidence soared. She raised the bet significantly, and Jake could see her mentally calculating how much more humiliation she could extract from this moment. Her supporters in the crowd grew more vocal, their various alien languages creating a cacophony of anticipated victory, but as the community cards were revealed, Jake's mediocre pair of sevens became a full house. Zarathul's excellent starting hand turned out to be just two pair. The mathematical probability matrices she was so proud of had failed to account for the simple randomness of card distribution. The gaming lounge fell silent as Jake revealed his winning hand. Zarathal stared at the cards in disbelief, her tail now rigid with shock. Several aliens in the crowd made sounds that Jake's translator couldn't identify, probably expressions of amazement that didn't exist in human language. "Impossible," whispered a Christek observer. Its gem-like body flickering between colors, but that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 hours, Jake systematically dismantled the princess's game. He won with terrible hands through pure bluffing, folded with good hands when he sensed traps, and played each round with an unpredictability that frustrated Zarathal's logical approach. The crowd's mood shifted as word spread throughout the station. More aliens arrived to witness the impossible, a human defeating a Phylixian noble in a game of pure strategy and psychology. Some began placing side bets on individual hands. Jake's most spectacular victory came on a hand where he had absolutely nothing. His highest card was a jack. Zarathal had a straight flush, one of the best possible hands. But Jake read the subtle overconfidence in her posture and bet everything he had won so far. "I call," he said calmly, pushing his entire stack of chips forward. Zarathal's eyes widened. Her rational mind told her that no intelligent being would make such a bet with a weak hand. But she had seen humans do inexplicable things before. For the first time since the game began, doubt crept into her voice. "You cannot possibly have anything that beats my hand," she said. But her tail betrayed her uncertainty with its nervous twitching. Jake just smiled and waited. In poker, sometimes the most important skill was knowing when to shut up and let your opponent's mind work against them. After what felt like an eternity, Zarathal folded her winning hand. The crowd erupted in chaos as Jake collected the chips without even having to show his cards. Several aliens had to be restrained by station security as arguments broke out about whether humans possess some form of mind control. When the final hand was dealt 3 hours later, Jake had accumulated most of the chips on the table. Zarathal sat in stunned silence, her earlier arrogance completely deflated. She had been outplayed not by superior intelligence or technology, but by something her species had never fully understood: the human capacity for deception, intuition, and psychological warfare. "The game is yours, human," she admitted quietly, her proud voice barely above a whisper. Jake gathered his winnings, but he wasn't interested in the credits. "I believe you owe me that request, Your Highness." The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. What would the victorious human demand? Territory? Technology? A diplomatic alliance? Jake straightened up and looked directly into Zarathal's emerald eyes. "I want you to respect humans as equals. No more comments about primitive minds or savage instincts. Acknowledge that intelligence comes in many forms." It was a reasonable request, exactly what someone might expect from a diplomatic human trying to improve his species' standing. But Zarathal's reaction was anything but expected. Her ears flattened against her skull and her fur stood on end. "No," she hissed, loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. "By the ancient laws of my people, you have won far more than a simple request. You have defeated me in honorable combat of minds. According to Phylixian tradition... She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "You have won the right to claim my paw in marriage." The gaming lounge exploded into chaos once again, but this time Jake was too shocked to pay attention to the alien voices shouting in dozens of languages. He stared at the princess, certain his translator had malfunctioned. "I'm sorry, what now?" Jake Morrison's peaceful existence as a trade negotiator on Nexus Prime shattered the moment Princess Zarathal declared their marriage binding under Phylixian law. Within hours, his modest quarters were surrounded by a small army of cat-like aliens in ceremonial armor, their leader announcing that they were now his personal guard. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Jake protested to Commander Veltar, the grizzled Phylixian warrior who had appointed himself head of security. "I just won a card game." "That doesn't make me royalty." Veltar's battle-scarred face remained impassive as he consulted a holographic legal document floating between them. Article 7 of the Ancient Codes clearly states that victory in ritual combat grants the winner claim to the defeated noble's bloodline. Princess Zarathul invoked these laws herself when she challenged you, but it was just poker. Jake ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Nobody mentioned anything about ritual combat or marriage rights. Ignorance of Phylixian law does not invalidate its application, Veltar replied with military precision. The princess made the challenge in public before witnesses from 17 different species. The marriage bond is now a matter of galactic legal record. Jake slumped into his chair, trying to process the surreal situation. Through his quarters viewport, he could see Phylixian diplomatic vessels arriving at the station in increasing numbers. Apparently, news of a human marrying into alien royalty was spreading fast through their territory. His door chimed, and Zarathul herself entered, flanked by 2 female guards. She had changed from her gaming attire into elaborate robes that shimmered with embedded technology. Her silver fur was perfectly groomed, and jeweled ornaments adorned her ears and tail. "We need to discuss our situation," she announced without preamble, her previous friendly demeanor replaced by formal distance. "Our situation?" Jake stood up, gesturing helplessly. "Princess, surely we can find a way out of this. I never intended to marry anyone, especially not someone from another species." Zarathul's emerald eyes flashed with something that might have been hurt before returning to cold professionalism. "Believe me, human, this arrangement is no more appealing to me than it is to you. However, the law is absolute. My own mother, the Empress, has already been informed. Attempting to void the marriage now would bring shame upon my entire bloodline." Commander Veltar stepped forward. "Perhaps I should explain the full implications. As the princess's mate, you now hold significant political power within the Phylixian Empire. Your decisions could affect the lives of billions of our people." "I'm a trade negotiator," Jake protested. "I arrange shipping contracts for mining companies. I'm not qualified to influence interstellar politics." "Nevertheless, that is now your reality," Zarathul said firmly, "which is why we must establish ground rules immediately." She activated a holographic display that showed the complex hierarchical structure of Phylixian noble society. Jake's head spun as she explained his new position as prince consort, the various ceremonies he would be expected to attend, and the political alliances his mere existence would affect. "Wait," Jake interrupted. "What about human customs? Don't I get any say in how this works?" For the first time since entering his quarters, Zarathul looked genuinely curious. "What are human marriage customs like?" Jake thought about it for a moment. "Well, for starters, both people usually want to get married. We have dating, courtship, meeting each other's families. There's supposed to be love involved." "Love?" Zarathul's translator seemed to struggle with the concept. "You mean the emotional attachment that clouds rational judgment?" "That's not what love is," Jake said, then paused. "How do you explain human emotions to an alien species that approached relationships like business contracts?" "Love is when 2 people choose to build a life together because they care about each other's happiness and well-being." The princess considered this, her tail swishing thoughtfully. "Phylixian marriages are arranged based on genetic compatibility, political advantage, and psychological profiles. Emotional attachment may develop over time, but it is not considered essential." "Well, that explains a lot," Jake muttered. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from Veltar's communication device. The commander listened for a moment, his expression growing grave. "Your Highness, we have a problem. Ambassador Thexner of the Zephyrian Trade Consortium is demanding an immediate audience. He claims the marriage violates existing trade agreements between his people and ours." Jake had heard of the Zephyrians, a species of tall, ethereal beings who controlled several major shipping routes through this sector. They were known for their complex legal minds and their talent for finding loopholes in any agreement. "Let me guess," Jake said. "My species isn't considered civilized enough to marry into alien nobility?" Zarathul's ears flattened against her skull, a sign of anger Jake was beginning to recognize. "The Zephyrians have always considered themselves superior to other species. They particularly dislike humans because your people refuse to submit to their trade monopolies." 20 minutes later, Jake found himself in the station's main diplomatic conference room, facing down a 7-foot-tall Zephyrian whose translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Ambassador Thexner moved with fluid grace, his forearms gesticulating as he spoke. "This union is an abomination," the ambassador declared in a voice like wind chimes. "The Phylixian Empire has agreements with my government regarding bloodline purity and genetic standards. Allowing a primitive species to contaminate noble genetics violates every principle of civilized society." Jake felt his temper rising, but before he could respond, Zarathil stood smoothly from her seat. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone born to rule. "Ambassador Thexner, are you suggesting that the Zephyrian Consortium wishes to interfere in the internal laws and customs of the Phylixian Empire?" The ambassador's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Jake's cultural briefings had told him indicated nervousness. "Not interfere, Your Highness, merely express concern about the implications for our existing agreements." "I see." Zarathil's tone remained dangerously calm. "And exactly which agreement grants your people the right to approve or disapprove?" "Of whom I choose to marry?" Jake watched this exchange with growing fascination. He was seeing a different side of the princess, not the overconfident gamer he had defeated, but a skilled politician who knew exactly how to use her opponent's words against them. "Furthermore," Zarathil continued, "I believe my new mate demonstrated last night that human intelligence should not be underestimated. Perhaps the consortium would benefit from re-evaluating their assumptions about primitive species." The word mate sent an odd shiver through Jake, though he couldn't quite identify why Ambassador Thexner's patterns shifted rapidly as he realized he was losing the diplomatic exchange. "Your Highness, surely you cannot expect the galactic community to accept this unprecedented situation without proper evaluation of its implications." "What I expect," Zarathil replied with silky menace, "is for allied governments to respect our sovereignty and our laws. Unless, of course, the Zephyrian Consortium wishes to formally declare those laws invalid." Jake suddenly understood the trap Zarathil had set. If the Zephyrians officially challenged Phylixian marriage law, it would be seen as an act of aggression. That could justify anything from trade sanctions to military action. But if they accepted the marriage, they would have to deal with Jake as a legitimate member of alien nobility. The ambassador's patterns dimmed to indicate submission. "The consortium acknowledges the sovereignty of Phylixian law and congratulates Your Highness on your recent union." After Thexner left, Jake looked at Zarathil with new respect. That was impressive. You turned his own arguments against him. "Basic diplomatic strategy," she replied, but Jake caught a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Though I must admit, your presence did provide an unexpected advantage." His prejudice against humans made him careless. "So what happens now?" Jake asked. Zarathil's formal mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine uncertainty. "Now we attempt to make this impossible situation work. The Empress expects us to present ourselves at the capital within one standard week. We will need to convince the entire royal court that our marriage is legitimate and beneficial to the Empire." Jake sat down heavily. "A week to learn how to be alien royalty and convince your family that I'm worthy of their princess." "No pressure at all." For the first time since their card game, Zarathil almost smiled. "Indeed, but consider this. If a human can defeat a Phylixian at cards, perhaps he can survive Phylixian court politics as well." As if summoned by their conversation, "Commander?" Veltar appeared in the doorway with another urgent message. "Your Highnesses, I regret to inform you that 3 more ambassadors have requested meetings. The Galactic Trade Commission wants to review the marriage contract and—" He paused, consulting his device. "Your mother wishes to speak with you immediately, Princess?" Jake looked out the viewport at the growing fleet of ships surrounding the station. News of their marriage was spreading through the galaxy faster than light communication, and everyone seemed to have an opinion about it. "Well," he said to Zarathil, "I guess we're really doing this." The princess straightened her robes and leaf. The imperial palace of the Phylixian Empire rose from the surface of Velara Prime like a crystalline mountain. its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the heartbeat of the planet itself. Jake Morrison stood at the viewport of their diplomatic transport, watching the massive structure grow larger as they descended through the atmosphere. Nervous? Princess Zarathil asked from beside him. Over the past week of traveling together, she had begun speaking to him more naturally, though they still maintained careful formality in public. Terrified, Jake admitted honestly. I'm about to meet the rulers of an interstellar empire, and my biggest qualification is that I'm really good at bluffing. That skill may prove more valuable than you realize, Zarathil replied. Felixian court politics require a certain talent for creative truth-telling. As their ship landed in the palace's vast docking bay, Jake could see dozens of nobles waiting in formal reception formation. Their ceremonial robes glittered with embedded technology, and their perfectly groomed fur marked them as members of the highest social castes. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the transport with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Remember, Zarathil said quietly as they prepared to disembark, show no weakness. Felixian nobles view submission as an invitation to attack. You are now a member of the royal family, and you must act like one. Jake straightened his shoulders and tried to project confidence he didn't feel. The diplomatic corps had provided him with formal attire that approximated Felixian noble dress while remaining recognizably human. The outfit felt like a costume, but it would have to do the moment they stepped off the ship. A wave of whispers swept through the assembled nobles. Jake heard fragments of conversation in various Felixian dialects, most of which his translator couldn't parse quickly enough to be useful. The tone, however, was unmistakably skeptical. At the front of the reception group stood Empress Silandra, Zarathil's mother and ruler of 300 worlds. She was an imposing figure even by Felixian standards, tall, silver-maned, and radiating the kind of authority that comes from generations of absolute power. Her emerald eyes, so similar to her daughter's, studied Jake with intense scrutiny. "Mother?" Zarathil said formally, bowing precisely to the degree required by protocol. "I present my mate, Jake Morrison of Earth." Jake had rehearsed this moment during their journey. He executed what he hoped was an appropriate bow deep enough to show respect, but not so deep as to suggest submission. "Your Imperial Majesty, it is an honor to meet you." The Empress's expression remained unreadable as she circled Jake slowly, examining him like a predator evaluating potential prey. The assembled nobles watched in silence, clearly waiting for some signal from their ruler. "So," the Empress said finally, "you are the human who defeated my daughter at cards and claimed her as prize." Jake felt his temper flare at the word prize, but caught himself. This was a test, he realized. The Empress was trying to provoke him into saying something that would justify rejecting him. "With respect, Your Majesty, I didn't claim anyone as a prize," he replied carefully. "I won a card game and your daughter invoked ancient Felixian law. I am simply honoring that law as a guest in your empire." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several nobles' ears twitched with what Jake was learning to recognize as approval. The Empress's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in evaluation. "Interesting," she mused. "You deflect responsibility while simultaneously acknowledging our authority. Either you are more politically sophisticated than reports suggest, or you have excellent advisors. I prefer to think of it as common sense." "Your Majesty." This time the Empress's whiskers twitched in what might have been amusement. "We shall see. Tonight you will attend the Feast of Integration, where you will be formally presented to the court. Tomorrow." She paused dramatically. "Tomorrow you will undergo the trial of worth." Jake's stomach dropped. Nobody had mentioned any trial during their preparation. Beside him, he felt Zarathil stiffen with surprise. "Mother," the princess said carefully, "the trial of worth has not been invoked in over 2 centuries. "Precisely why it is appropriate now," the Empress replied. "We cannot have the court thinking that humans can marry into our nobility without proving themselves worthy of the honor." That evening, Jake found himself in the palace's great hall, a vast chamber that could have housed a small city. Hundreds of nobles filled tables arranged in complex, hierarchical patterns that reflected the intricate social structure of Phylixian society. Jake and Zarathil sat at the high table with the immediate royal family, while servants that looked like smaller, more delicate versions of Phylixians moved among the guests. The food was surprisingly palatable to human tastes, apparently. Phylixian cuisine and human preferences had some overlap. What Jake found more challenging was the conversation, which flowed between multiple topics at lightning speed. Often in dialects his translator struggled to follow. "Prince Consort," said Duke Carvin from across the table, his tone suggesting that the title was somehow distasteful to him. "We understand your species is quite primitive in its technological development. How do you propose to contribute to our empire's advancement?" Jake set down his eating utensil and considered his response. Around the table, conversations had quieted as nobles waited to hear how the human would handle this obvious challenge. "Duke Carvin, you're absolutely right that human technology is less advanced than yours," Jake replied. "But that gives me a unique perspective that might be valuable. Sometimes being outside a system allows you to see solutions that those within it cannot, such as?" The Duke pressed, clearly expecting Jake to flounder. Jake thought about the card game that had started this whole situation. "Well, for example, last week I defeated Princess Zarathil at Quantum Hold'em not because I had better computational abilities, but because I could read patterns in her behavior that her own advanced psychology training couldn't detect. Different perspectives can reveal different truths." Several nobles exchanged glances. Jake could see that some were intrigued despite themselves. "Furthermore," he continued, warming to his theme, "humans have a particular talent for adaptation and survival in hostile environments. We've colonized worlds that other species consider uninhabitable. Perhaps the Empire could benefit from that experience." The Duke's ears flattened slightly, a sign of annoyance. "And you believe this adaptability qualifies you to marry into the royal bloodline?" Before Jake could answer, Zarathil spoke up. "Actually, Duke Carvin, I find my mate's unconventional thinking quite refreshing. Perhaps that's exactly what our bloodline needs, new perspectives to complement our existing strengths." The conversation continued late into the evening, with various nobles probing Jake's knowledge, opinions, and capabilities. He began to understand that this dinner was itself a form of trial, a chance for the court to evaluate whether he could hold his own in their political environment. The next morning, Jake was awakened by Commander Veltar, who led him to a circular chamber deep within the palace. The trial of worth, it turned out, was not a physical combat as Jake had feared, but something potentially more dangerous, a test of wisdom and judgment. The Empress sat on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, flanked by the senior members of the royal court. In the center of the chamber stood a holographic display showing a complex scenario. "Human," the Empress announced formally, "you will be presented with a situation that requires leadership decision-making. Your choices will be evaluated by the court to determine your fitness for royal status." The holographic display activated, showing a detailed simulation of a Phylixian colony world facing multiple crises simultaneously. Natural disasters, political unrest, economic collapse, and external threats all demanded immediate attention, but resources were limited. Jake would have to prioritize solutions while managing competing interests and limited time. As Jake studied the scenario, he realized this was similar to the kind of complex problem-solving humans had been doing for millennia. Military leaders, disaster coordinators, and even business managers face these sorts of multivariable challenges regularly. The specific details were alien, but the underlying structure was familiar. He began making decisions, explaining his reasoning as he went. When faced with a choice between saving a mining facility that employed thousands or protecting a smaller settlement with historical significance, he chose to evacuate the settlement's population to the mining facility, preserving both lives and economic capacity when political factions threatened to break into civil war. He proposed a temporary power-sharing agreement that gave each group control over the areas they were best suited to manage. Turning their competition into cooperation, the court watched in growing fascination as Jake worked through each challenge, often finding solutions that hadn't occurred to them. His approach was different from typical Felixian logic, less focused on optimization and more on finding creative compromises that served multiple purposes simultaneously. After 3 hours, the simulation ended. Jake stood before the silent court, exhausted but satisfied that he had done his best. The Empress studied the results for a long moment before speaking. "In 6 centuries of rule," she said slowly, "I have never seen anyone apper.